Yeah, I can hear you, Mike. Thank you.
Yeah, you sound good, Mike.
The gym looks full. Yeah. Oh, oh, is that why? That's why Linda's car's out. I was like, who else has got a car like that? She's the only one. Yeah. Yeah.
It is 7 o'clock. I'd like to call the September 17th council meeting.
This conference will now be recorded.
Sorry.
Mike, did you want to say something before?
I did. Yeah. Just very quickly, a couple of announcements about the hybrid online and in person. For those of you online, I see a few members of the public. I'll just ask you to keep your mic muted unless you specifically are called on by the mayor to speak. And just a reminder for those online, we have 2 council members that are attending online. And I'm going to turn my screen toward the audience. The room's relatively full, so you can't see them on the screen. You can't see the audience, and you can't hear the audience. Keep in mind for those who are attending online, the use of the microphones are important.
Yeah.
That's the TV. That's the TV.
You
Yeah,
might
there's
just
nobody
shut
out
the
there.
door.
We just mute that. Sorry.
Yeah, I wonder.
Just turn the volume down. Yeah, the last reminder was if the room got any fuller, we'd probably have to have a stage a waiting area out in the hall. I don't know if we get a whole bunch more people here. We've got the TV going out there with the video stream, but it's lags, so that's very annoying.
Okay.
We'll have to shut the door, I guess.
Yeah.
So I think we're okay for now.
All right. Well, I'll let Lori get back before we start roll call.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. It's a little different tonight.
Okay.
Yeah, I know. Not unless there's people out there, and we have to turn that volume up.
Roll call, please.
Lane,
Here.
Daniels.
Here.
Michael.
Here.
Murdoch.
Here.
Ritter.
Here.
Everyone's present.
Okay. Thank you. I would invite you all now to please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Our first item tonight is a proclamation designating September 17th through September 23rd, 2020 as Constitution Week. And I will now read the proclamation. Whereas our founding fathers, in order to secure the blessings of liberty for themselves and their posterity, did ordain and establish a Constitution for the United States of America, and whereas it is the greatest of the greatest importance that all citizens fully understand the provisions and principles contained in the Constitution in order to support, preserve, and defend it against all encroachment, and whereas the 233rd anniversary of the signing of the Constitution provides a historic opportunity for all Americans to realize the achievements of the framers of the Constitution and the rights, privileges, and responsibilities it affords, and whereas the independence granted or guaranteed to American citizens, whether by birth or naturalization, should be celebrated by appropriate ceremonies and activities during Constitution Week, September 17th through 23rd, 2020, as designated by proclamation of the President of the United States of America in accordance with Public Law 915. Now, therefore, I, Rick Walker, by virtue of the authority vested in me as mayor of the city of DeSoto in the state of Kansas, do hereby proclaim the week of September 17th through 23rd, 2020 as Constitution Week in the city of DeSoto, and I urge all citizens to reaffirm the ideals the framers of our Constitution had in 1787 by vigilantly protecting the freedoms guaranteed to us through this guardian of our liberties, remembering that lost rights may never be regained.
Did you need a picture with the mayor? Yes.
Okay.
Barbara, do you have your copy with you? Oh. Do you have your proclamation? Your proclamation?
That one looks better.
Yeah, I can take it. Get a magic marker and draw one on. Okay. Our next item on the agenda is our consent agenda. Tonight on the consent agenda, we have approval of the minutes of our council meeting of September 3rd and approval of pay ordinance number 886. Any discussion of the consent agenda items or a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion. We approve the consent agenda.
I will second that.
All right. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion of the motion? If not, roll call, please.
Yes.
Lane,
Yes.
Daniels,
Yes.
Anna Michael,
Yes.
Murdoch.
Yes.
Thank you, council. Motion carried, Mayor.
Okay. Our next item is called to the public. Members of the public are welcome to use this time to comment about any matter relating to city business not listed on tonight's agenda. The comments that are discussed under call to public may or may not be acted on by the council during this meeting. There is a 4-minute time limit. Does anyone wish to address the council tonight? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on to item 3, old business, discuss possible city code revision to accommodate habitat wildlife preservation projects within the city. Somebody gonna lead this off?
Well,
or-
I can introduce the city attorney, Patrick Reevy, for background on the memo. Patrick, I wonder if maybe you should come up to the podium just for the microphone purposes. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike and council. I want to keep my remarks pretty brief, but just to, as background information, at the last council meeting, the city council had in front of you an ordinance that would make some slight adjustments to our weed ordinance in the city code that would allow the city council to consider exemptions to the existing regulations. Based on feedback at the last council meeting, I further revised that ordinance to try to set forth some more parameters, address some of the issues that were brought up at the last meeting. For example, were portions of properties throughout the city that are everybody agrees are not maintained, areas in the backs of properties, ravines, that type of thing. So I tried to address that. And then I had sent that email out to the mayor and Mike, and the mayor was kind enough to give some feedback during the week on some ordinances he had found out of Minnesota. So I took what he found and further adjusted the ordinance to have some of the criterias that the Minnesota ordinance included. So really the way I see what you have before you is you have essentially three options. One, you can take no action, leave the weed regulations as they are, and it would be up to the code officer to enforce the regulations we have on the books right now. Second choice would be to adopt the ordinance that was in your packet. That would still require any projects such as the project that you heard about at the last meeting. It would require that to be presented to the city council, and the city council vote to allow that project. And then the third option would be to adopt the ordinance that I mentioned here a moment ago, that essentially would leave it up to the city code officer, but the amendments do give the code officer flexibility such that certain areas would be considered exempt from the existing ordinance, and they would include natural habitat if certain conditions were met, agricultural areas, many of the areas that were discussed at the last meeting that I don't think anybody disputes are not regularly mowed and and people are not given citations for that. So I'll stand for any questions.
Okay.
If no questions, I'll turn it over to you guys.
Okay. Any questions for Patrick on any of the material he's presented? If not, then we'll just start our discussions of what we have before us. I shared or did some research over the week about ordinances that if we are going to do this, I think that we need to define some parameters for how this would be implemented, where and how it might work, so that everybody knows what the expectation is, and we and that was what I found in some of the ordinances that I read from some of the communities in Minnesota that had undertaken this. Kansas is pretty light on. Lenexa has some stuff. The state maybe had a little bit of guidance on, or encouragement that cities reconsider some of the more restrictive growth ordinances that would allow some of this. But there wasn't a good example go by. But I did find in my research on the Minnesota stuff some stuff that I thought made a lot of sense. Personally, I think that we can get that not every lawn has to be the same, and I think that that's probably part of the attraction of our community. We're not a one size for everything. We have large lots and large acreages, and then we have some traditional suburban lots. So what we're seeing in the community is that variance, that the lifestyles that people like lead them to pick the properties that they want, and that's part of the attraction of our city. Hopefully now I've stammered on long enough that you all have come up with some thoughts and would want to interject. I would welcome any discussion, thoughts. So on 1, 2, or 3, as Patrick outlined, if you want to discuss in that order or just share your thoughts.
Yeah, if you don't mind, Mayor, I will start. I wasn't here last time we had a talk, so nobody's kind of heard anything out of me on the issue. So the way I see it right up front, what we're trying to do is decide if we want to adopt a new ordinance. And then a step beyond that is if we do want to adopt this new ordinance that has been put before us, does this particular property, confine to these new regulations that we would be putting into place? We as a council, I think, want to find a solution that everybody can be happy with. Policy is very static when we're doing our DeSoto, any of our ordinances, any of our regulations, and we're continuously changing them. I know in one letter, one of the people commented that, I tried to do something and the city wouldn't change for me. Why are we changing for this? Well, it's a continuous change to policy, and we're continuously trying to adapt the vision of the city in the current times with what's going on and what our policy is. Our current noxious weed, I called it obnoxious at work today, and had to correct myself that it's noxious, although they are kind of obnoxious. Weed policy is really just kind of a general state policy from what I understand. And there's nothing wrong with us making changes to that to make it fit our community a little better. As the mayor said, and I agree totally, the beauty of our city is that it is such a natural landscape city. We have a river on one side. We have 2 creeks running through. We have a beautiful lake to the west of us. We have a lake to the south of us. We have multiple parks. And when we have visitors to our Rotary Club, they over and over comment about how beautiful it is because of what we have here. There are many areas of the city that would be considered, as the new ordinance would state, kind of the natural landscape, because the first thing when the issue came up and you kind of drive around the city, there's the same weeds everywhere. Well, those are the ones that are in this natural landscape. You see it along Kill Creek, you see it on Lexington, you see it along Corliss, you see it along 83rd. The natural landscape is there. It's part of our city. But you also see flower beds that are overgrown. There's many examples of that out through the city. But what I have really learned, and when you drive around, you realize quickly, is that everybody's vision of what is a nice lawn and landscaping, or what they want theirs to be, is totally different. Some people don't want to do a dang thing, and they may not even have a tree in their lawn. They might keep it mowed, but that's all that's there. And others think their lawn is beautiful when it's a bunch of overgrown weeds, you know. So it's just the way it is, okay? One thing that is, not going to hop over to my other notes here. We have a lot of large lots, and we have chosen these for a reason. We want to have room on our property for our interests, and what one person agrees to is not going to be the same. And, you know, I kind of looked around the council. All of us on council live on 2+ acres of property. We do that for a reason. We like to be able to have and do on our property what we want. And one may not agree that we should always allow extra buildings on our side, on the properties, you know, all the concrete and the buildings and the driveways, but that's what people want. You know, that's what we in DeSoto, people have come and asked us to make regulation changes. So we change things, and we do have a lot of that going on here. So changing the minds of the neighbors who don't like this property is not going to be an easy thing. It's not really my job to change that. What I'm looking at is simply looking at the policy and see if there's harm actually done to the community or the neighbors with this. And when it first came about, and was brought to my attention by Marcia, I drove by it and I said, well, I don't see anything wrong with it, and kind of forgot about it until, you know, a week or two later, when it was brought to my attention at a council meeting a month ago by Patrick that somebody was making an issue, and do we want to look into making changes? So of course I'm like, well, from what I saw, as long as there's setbacks and, you know, it's not harming somebody else, there really probably shouldn't be a reason not to be able to do something. And from what I've seen with this particular yard in question, and what we would want to do in any yard in question, is make sure that there are setbacks in the yard, that the yard is maintained around what may or may not be called a flower bed. The tall weeds, you know, some plants are taller than others. I mean, that's part of prairie, you know. And for those that don't really like the tall weeds, I mean, would it be any different if that was his garden and that was 8-foot corn there that you're looking at? That's a little bit of how I looked at that one. It's not fair to say that he's just doing this because he doesn't want to mow. You know, there's that was in some letters and comments to me, and I think that's really ridiculous. He's put more effort into it with this particular project in mind. And, you know, again, what makes it a flower bed or a weed patch, you know, borders, you know, it's hard to say on that. So comments about weeds and whether they are causing other neighbors to have weeds. My guess is that the ragweed in that patch is probably weeds that have come from surrounding areas that came into his flower bed. I doubt if he planted ragweed in there, but you know, those things are things that come up annually, and they'll go away also if they are removed. I don't agree that it makes DeSoto look bad to change our policy to allow some native landscaping, as long as it is controlled. And I think those are kind of really my comments about it. As you can see in my direction is that, you know, I'm a big wildflower lover. And actually when I go walking, I pick up all the flowers and dead things laying around the ground, and I put them in my backyard where I am trying to get a wildflower garden going. Luckily for me, it's surrounded by cedar trees and nobody sees it but myself, so I don't have to go through this criticism that someone else is being put through. But the big thing that I see really here is that I would be in support of making a change to our ordinances to allow such a thing. The big question, I guess, the only question I really have, and more things I guess to discuss about, is the noxious weeds. even the new policy says no noxious weeds. And I'm familiar with weeds and which ones, some weeds are really a person's flowers. So we can't always go by the term weeds, because weeds and Kansas wildflowers are kind of the same thing. And so you got to really kind of be careful about that. But the Kansas, and I'm going to kind of look at you guys back there because you're going to be able to answer my question. But the Kansas, if we keep it as it's written, then we're following the Kansas Noxious Weed Act, and the ragweed is in that act, and there's tall ragweed in your yard. And so to make it a solution and trying to find the problem, that garden, if it was allowed to be there, still needs to conform to that. And is that something that can be taken care of, and will it be taken care of? And I'm not necessarily meaning waiting until next spring to burn it off, but is there a way to remove some of that ragweed that is probably the biggest concern of anything in there? Now, I'm sure there's some thistle, whether it's the thistle that's in the noxious weed, I don't know, and maybe there's not thistle in it. Okay, that's good, because, that's the only other, those are the two that are probably in the act that would be problemsome. So those are my questions and comments. And once again, I think we really want to kind of come to a solution that, knowing that with this new ordinance, it still would have to be a controlled environment. There would still be setbacks. There would still be ways for us to look at it and say, no, this isn't following what we want because of the weeds that are out of control in the area.
Okay. Thank you, Roy. Okay. Rob, any?
So at last council meeting, at the end of it, I said I wasn't quite sure where I stood on it. Part of that's because I wanted more information. Part of that's why I delayed it. This is not a struggle that's new or isolated to our city by any means. I remember decades back, I have a company that supports Apple computer stuff, so I pay attention to Apple. Steve Jobs did this in his yard decades back, and it was a big hoopla about that in San Jose and Silicon Valley area. So this type of thing has come up in other cities and been dealt with in other cities. One of the things that we've seen, and Lori kind of touched on it, and we hear all the time, and I've heard it more since I've been on council, is the fact that what is DeSoto? And okay, we don't want to be, and certain things happen, and it's like, we don't want to be Overland Park. We don't want to be Shawnee. We like our DeSoto. We like the ability to do it. One of the selling points that has been huge to a lot of people is they come out here and they don't have to deal with homeowners associations, and they don't have to deal with that type of mandating of you have to have your house a color, you have to have your yard a certain way, and that the small town, larger lots bring some of that freedom. And so that's one of the things I constantly have heard, and other council members have heard, and a lot of you citizens have heard and or expressed about what is DeSoto, what is it going to be? Is it going to be the Shawnee, the Overland Park, the Lenexes, or is it going to be the small town that we moved to that we came out here to love? So at that point, a lot of what's coming down now is what really defines weeds versus flowers, overgrown weeds versus that. One thing I would encourage, a lot of people have come here, talk to your neighbors. What I found is I went out last Saturday and Sunday and I went into the neighborhood. Like I said, we've sold popcorn there for decades. So we know a lot of the names are there. And I went and knocked on some of the doors and I talked to people. I talked to people that weren't on the petition list. I talked to some that were on the petition list. I went and visited with the homeowner and walked around the project and had him explain what was going on and talked about it. And what I found is that while there's a vocal group here that's saying that they don't like it, there were neighbors that were going, I have no problem with this. And that this is some of why we moved out here, is because we like being able to do what we want to do. And so there's two sides to this, and I heard both. And I heard both fairly equally. And even one or two that were on the petition list, when you start talking about it, explaining what the project was as explained in the council meeting, we're like, well, we didn't quite know that. It didn't change the fact that they thought it was overgrown or excessive, but it did change the fact that they didn't realize it. And at that point, I also got, and I think the whole council got one or two of these complaints. And one of them was that they had been contacted about this. So they went and drove by it. And so they live in the neighborhood. And this last week was the first time that they had actually heard of it, seen it, driven by it. And now they were making a complaint saying, we don't want this, when they didn't even know it existed. And actually, I had communication with that person. I'm like, okay, did you know? And they said no. I said, did you watch the council meeting? They said no. So there's not been a lot of communication where people have actually asked what is going on. And they, in that letter, and I've heard it multiple times, described the homeowner as lazy, which walking around seeing what's been done, that's not a term I would use to be associated with it. So there's different information that's out there, and they don't all match and aren't all equal. So when it comes to what's being done, I'm actually fairly supportive of what I see in the ordinance as far as how it relates to definitions and working with it. I echo Lori on making sure that the noxious weeds that are defined are taken care of. And even at the last meeting, I was looking for a way, without having looked into it, talk to people more to try and find a solution or balance. And we're in a society that's fairly polarized, and didn't see much of one from the opposition side. So, I mean, those are my thoughts and comments on it at this point.
Okay.
And that's, like I said, some of that's from having gone out and actually talked to some of the neighbors in the neighborhood.
All right, thank you, Rob. Kevin?
Yeah, I'll give some thoughts, and Laura, I appreciate your perspective on it. I see this really as something that hopefully we collaborate on and find a way to work through, as opposed to take a position on, if you will. Some of what I come at it from my history on planning commission, and I'm pretty much a rule follower. So I thought this was pretty cut and dried when we came into it 2 weeks ago, and we got an ordinance on the books. It needs enforced. Let's get after it. What are we talking about? But then when I saw the presentation about restoration of natural habitat, I'm kind of for that too. And I, from my years on planning commission, where I have a bias to try to create structure, and I want to create a community that we're all proud of. But I also recognize that, I grew up in a rural community of 4,000 people, and that is part of the character that DeSoto has that is unique. We are part of greater metropolitan Johnson County. We are a suburban community. And so people who live here also expect that kind of structure that comes along with some of the, typical suburban environment. However, even in the area I'm in, which is a large lot subdivision, bring up the idea of forming a homes association, and, I might as well get run out of the neighborhood, because that is some of what people like about DeSoto is there isn't a lot of that overreaching control that does cause things to be too vanilla. So after the course of the last meeting, I'm definitely open to thinking about a way that something could be accommodated, because frankly, I like the idea of naturalized vegetation. And frankly, I might like to do some of that on my property. I think there's some merit to it, some beauty to it, certainly some character to it. I probably would tighten it up a little bit more over the ordinance, and maybe this is something we can talk about as well. I kind of view it because the first time I drove by it, I thought, "Wow, this is bad. This needs taken care of." And I think more what probably, as I drove by it as recently as on my way over here, I think of when we have vehicles or campers or boats that are parked in front yards. That's something we tend to take offense to, and so that the fact that it extends in front of the house maybe is problematic. I was asked the mayor, I thought, maybe there's something about coverage, percent of coverage, but then I thought, well, but maybe you have a vacant tract, and this would be a good way to take care of that vacant tract if it was well maintained. So I think that there's a variety of alternatives here. I think that the fact that it happened in what I think we can definitively say in violation of our weed ordinance and has caused debate is problematic for how we have a discussion about the ability to have a naturalized landscape feature on our properties. So that irritates me. And it makes it hard to have. I think if we were having this conversation and having a discussion about this topic as a fresh idea, we would be looking at it entirely differently. So I'm also trying to continue to put myself back in that mode of, well, let's just take the debate out of the situation out of it and go, what about it on the merit of the idea itself, and not the specific corner. I think the specific corner will have to come into compliance in some way. The other thing I think is there are places that the city has surplus property where I think it'd be a good idea to implement it. I think it would be a good community-centric idea to maybe implement some of this, maybe as part of our parks program or something. So if, from hearing the presentation from the individual with the state, maybe it is a good idea, and therefore, why couldn't we embrace it in some scale on a residential lot? So, I think personally, there's opportunity to incorporate it. I think it is in keeping with the character of our large lot community. I think it's in keeping with the character of kind of the rural feel, and I also agree with Lori. As I drove over here, where's the boundary between just an overgrown lot, right? It's got trees and poison ivy and, just an overgrown area. And I've got a chunk of that on mine. And something that's actually, if not manicured, at least it is structured and done very intentionally, as opposed to some of the large properties within the community that are just natural by nature. They're just naturally natural. So I'm open to some discussion on it. I do see that it is inconsistent with the way the ordinance exists, and I think there ought to be some reconciliation or some correction associated with it, certainly to the point that we're willing to accept a modification to our ordinance. Those are my thoughts. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Kevin. Kevin Ritter, any comments?
Well, I think most of them have already been said. I think when it was brought to the council at the previous meeting, a lot of the presentation and some of the discussion, I was really on the fence with it. I was compassionate for the father and daughter project. I think that I've traveled for a living. I think that was a great piece to do when you get to have some family time and do those things. So I was compassionate for that. But then when I went and looked at it, it wasn't near what we'd envisioned during, or at least I envisioned during the last council meeting. I was thinking it was part of maybe a 40 by 60 garden or a 20 by 40 garden, is what it appeared to be. But this thing surrounds the whole house. So after listening to some of the discussion, I'm still leaning towards not changing, so leaving the ordinance as it is. And then if change needs to be made, then we look at it. And I'm like, as Kevin said earlier, I think change can be made, but I don't think it's in this instance. I think it just needs to be taken care of. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Kevin. Danny, any comments to share on this?
Yes. I'd like to say that, I'm in favor of natural habitats and, a tall grass prairie, but I'm sorry, I'm leaning toward, that if it's a tall grass prairie, it needs to be on the prairie, not in the middle of the subdivision. Especially the scale that is there at that property. And I looked over it 2 or 3 times and drove by and got out and looked. And, I appreciate the project of the father and daughter. And, I know that, but it was just really overwhelming in the subdivision that it was in. And I don't think that, that was the right choice for being that large in that subdivision. On a smaller scale in the back part of the property and not surrounding the whole area, I think it would have fit okay, and then we wouldn't have had this discussion. But I'm willing to to look over some other options, but I just feel the ordinance should stand as is, and that we should go on from there. And if this comes up again, we need to look at it. And I just feel that it was the wrong place for a prairie in the middle of the subdivision. I can see that, that if they had some adjoining property someplace else that wasn't in the middle of a subdivision where people like to take care of their property by mowing and hoeing and gardens and that kind of thing. And, I just feel that this was an inappropriate place for that. So I would vote for the staying with the ordinance the way it stands. And thank you, Mayor. That's all I have to comment about.
Thank you, Danny. Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So I'm really seeing 2 potential issues here. Number one, we're dealing with the ordinance, and the ordinance as unrelated to and or related to the existing property. But even if we pass the ordinance tonight, then we still have a property that at the time was out of compliance or in compliance, depending upon how you define garden, weed, noxious weeds, taken care of, not taken care of. So if we don't pass the ordinance tonight, there's still the question of, do we consider it to be a garden or do we consider it to be just weeds under the ordinance? If we do pass the ordinance tonight, then we still have the question of the existing property in place. So is this we pass the ordinance and the property owner gets to proceed as is, or is this we don't pass the ordinance and that means immediately enforcement without defining what it is? I mean, where are we on, is this really one action or 2 actions?
So I think either ordinance we might pass would require some action by the property owner to come into compliance with whether ordinance we undertake. So the first ordinance, there is an application and vetting process, if you will. And the second one, it's not as rigorous on that side, but it defines setbacks. So then there would be measures to make sure that the garden or plantings were in compliance with the appropriate setbacks, and the noxious weeds were not present in the garden or plants. Whether or not we define it as a garden, now I don't know what that. I guess that would only apply if we took no action on changing it or adopting a new ordinance, and then we're just to decide whether or not those that would qualify as a garden or a weed patch.
Yeah, one comment addition on that is, I understand Kevin Honemichael's way of thinking it, that, it would have been better to be presented with with an ordinance like this without having something that we're actually looking at. But had that been presented to me, I would have taken these same things that we did and we would have come up with this ordinance. And we would have said, hey, yeah, this is a good idea, because we haven't seen our yard covered in it. there's not a size, because what happens if you have 3 acres and you say, okay, well, you can only do a quarter of it? Well, if that's quarters right in the front corner of somebody's, we're still going to not like that part. So, the where you put it and what percentage, the ordinance that we brought forth today, the one that I think is showing up there.
This is just yesterday's.
Yeah, the most recent one.
Yeah.
It takes care of a problem. So, Danny's like, well, let's wait till it comes up again. Well, that's not going to do any good. We'd be in the same situation we're in now. We need to make a decision. Do we want to allow it in our community or not? And then if we do allow it, that's our ordinance. That lawn still has noxious weeds in it that need to be taken care of to be able to comply with something that would be even this one here. If those noxious weeds are removed from that area, then he's in compliance with it. If they are not, then it would not be in compliance, even with this new one. But to say, let's put it off and look at it later when it comes up again, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because, if it comes up again, obviously we're having people that are wanting these type of neighborhoods, yards and doing it. So, it answers a lot of questions by putting setbacks, by defining things. What's a garden and what's not a garden, I guess, would be the only kind of question, but it really doesn't matter. If there's noxious weeds in anybody's garden, they should be removed. The only exception to that really is when we have native, in this new one, we have native areas or something that is not really in the meadow. Oh, I thought it was in here. I'd have to find where it's at. And those are like underneath your trees, your wild trees, and along undeveloped areas. If you drive along Kill Creek and with golf course, that's all native. That's not been touched, and it's that way. And that's why it's okay that there's ragweed all over it and still blowing in everybody's yard and stuff, but it's still there, So, that's where it stands. And I'm going to guess that, if the tall 8-foot ragweed is out of that yard and some of those noxious weeds are out of that particular situation, we wouldn't be quite as bad with the neighbors as what we are now, because it's really not hurting you just don't like to look at it. And I don't know if we make policies on just something like that. So I'm that's kind of where I'm at on it, is that we did come up with a policy based on Rick's research and Patrick's research that would be the same sort of policy that's going to come to you if we put this off and make him mow and come back in 6 months and look at it again. You're going to probably come up with the same policy.
I think you're.
You see what I'm saying?
Yes,
yeah.
Right. The steps we would have gone through, we would have followed the same path and likely ended at the same conclusion. I certainly would have, because that's the way we solve problems. So.
I was going to say, I agree with Kevin in that, I'd have some personal choices on their lot and how they did it, as far as, okay, cut back a little bit here or there. But I kind of tried to think about it of, okay, when we talk about, is it excessive, not excessive? Do you do a percentage of a lot? Do you do not a percentage of a lot? There was a question of, do you do, say, not in the front yards? But our community is so diverse on lot size and things like that, that really gets difficult to do. And I know, for example, just an example, if you said not in the front yard, and I actually dealt with this because when we moved into our house, it didn't have a garage. We moved from Overland Park. Because we wanted to get away from that, and we wanted some land, but the house didn't have a garage, so we're on almost 5 acres. So it was like, okay, simple solution. We build a garage. So we started looking at where to put the garage, and quickly found out that we couldn't put the garage anywhere because our house sits 50 feet off the back property line, which is the maximum the minimum setback for a house to be on the property line. So literally our whole lot is defined as our front yard. And you can't have a detached building in your front yard. So we ended up having to either look at doing a special use permit or a variance on setback to be able to even build a garage based upon the type of lot. And I know there's other lots that have houses sitting at the back. So when you start to define percentage of a lot or define front yard, it really gets very, very difficult to match the diversity of lots and housing in our community. So the setback is probably the easiest way to do it and the most effective way. The question then comes to be, is 25 feet or 15 feet off the front, are those setbacks something that we would want to do? And whether we deal with it tonight, I agree with Lori on that, whether we deal with it tonight or another time, we'd be coming up with a very similar ordinance as far as research and how we're coming up with it. If not, the fact that we've actually probably looked at closer and looked at a lot of other options based upon the fact that this is something that has come up and it likely would come up again. And driving around Lenexa, Shawnee, DeSoto in the last 2 weeks, there's a lot of these areas that are out there, and some of them are tall, some of them are shorter. So I think dealing with setbacks, and I think what we have come up with, whether this lot was in play or not in play, is something that we would have come up with anyway. And really the question would be, is the setback where we want it to be in there? But I know there's a lot of people that would actually like looking into this as allowed. So, and having some guidelines to be able to allow it, but keep it managed is probably something we want to do at some point anyway.
Okay.
Question, and this may be for the city attorney. So as this is written and proposed, this is still essentially a complaint-based situation, and it's not like an application or a reviewed garden. You're not having somebody review your landscape plan. It's still a complaint-based situation. Is that correct?
Correct. The enforcement would still be with the code enforcement officer. It would not be a case-by-case basis presented to the city council. I would mention in putting together the ordinance, I didn't try to make sure that the ordinance would allow, for this property. I simply used the setback areas from the ordinance that the mayor had found. So I really don't have specific knowledge on whether the property would be in compliance as it sits now. That'd be something we'll have to work with the code enforcement officer.
And front yard is defined, correct me if I'm wrong, front yard is defined as the front of the, is determined by the front of the structure. So like my reference to storage of boats, trailers, campers, that sort of thing, because I know we went around and around and around about this. I mean, can you park a trailer in the front yard or not? We decided no. It's determined by the front of the structure. Is that correct, Patrick? And just by going by the zoning regulations definitions?
It's from the front property line. So it'd be, as the ordinance is written, you could not
Not the ordinance, I'm asking in our current definition of front yard.
Oh, in the zoning regulations,
Yeah.
yes.
How do we currently define the front yard? As I recall it and as I see it, it is defined to the front of the structure.
Right, an
Correct.
imaginary line.
Not just the building setback line, but to where the structure actually was, which is the situation you ran into. Because I guess if I had to, again, Lori is so spot on with the idea that, one person's idea of a beautiful yard and another's are two totally different things. My view would be I'm not crazy about that, this unique situation in the front yard, right? And so my bias would be to that it fit with our front yard definition and have it pushed back to that at least.
I would note that this also defines that if you have a corner lot, then
Then
each basically any side that would abut a street would
And
have that
is
setback
consistent with
applied.
that's the way our zoning regulations
Yeah.
define it as well.
Mayor, if I could say one more thing.
Certainly.
Kevin, thank you for bringing that up. It made me think of it. That's another reason why I have trouble with just, and I fully understand that we may need to make some changes to an ordinance here and there. But for these ones that we have enforcement, like the trailers, like the boats, we don't ever enforce them. So, and they're only if somebody complains. So if one person doesn't like somebody or goes by or finds out that they weren't born or lived here, then they go by and complain, and then we make them move their trailer. But I think we need, if we're going to choose to change things like this or allow those other items to be in negligence of the ordinances that we have, then we need a full-time person to go out there and do code enforcement. And we need to discuss that as well.
Well, and if I can respond, I mean, we've gone as a community round and round and round with this, and have decided at least we've gotten to the point of taking it as a complaint-based situation, because there are some situations where, you know, it may not be offensive because it is completely screened or whatever. But we have the ordinances. I believe they should be enforced. But we've debated, should we be proactively driving around and finding violations, or should we be responding by complaint? So far, it's been complaint.
We're a step above complaint now, though. We do pick off the worst. If you want to jump in and explain.
We do, yeah.
policy
So
on
we have had this discussion
every year.
at least
I think we
three,
discussed this.
yeah, at least 3 or 4 times over the last 10 years, and it's constantly evolving. This is one of those. It's just kind of a community balance, you know, because we have people on both sides. Well, the policy is now, and we've adopted this policy by resolution. The policy now is we're going to establish 5 to 10 locations that are particular eyesores and particular visible within the community, address those on a proactive basis, and then we will actively seek out and enforce particular anything has to do with public health and safety, obviously, weeds, mowing type regulations, and dilapidation, severe dilapidation. Other than that, everything else is on a complaint basis. So that's just kind of the balance. The baby we're trying to split, walking the line there. That's where the current policy is, and we can have the discussion again.
And we also steer community resources toward bringing properties into compliance if that's at all possible.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, and that's where, I mean, this natural habitat prairie grass is on a complaint basis because we're getting it as a complaint here. But one of our former council members, the Crudwigs, they had several of these sizable ones in their yard. And at that point, it was no complaint, even though they were very sizable in their yard. And some were side yard and front yard. But at the same time, I don't know if we want to go so far as a community to enforcement of having a full-time codes person driving around all the time, every time, because, and actually, aside from this discussion, I was having a discussion with somebody today that lives in Shawnee, Lenexa, and their actual complaints were the fact that they believe they have a code enforcement person drive their neighborhood once a week, enforcing everything, and pretty much that was excessive. So, I mean, there's the balance that we've been trying to strike for years on how do we enforce.
So movement here on this. So Kevin, hearing your comments, were there any changes to does either of the ordinances presented seem more appropriate to our and
Maybe more powerful?
Are there specific items you would like to see included or addressed?
Well, the second version I think is much more palatable in my mind. And the one thing that stuck out to me, and again, it's just my opinion, is I would make the front setback to match our front yard setback definition, and that is to the front of the structure setback. Otherwise, I thought it actually was, pretty good in the way that it defined different types of situations, including gardens, and keeping the noxious weeds in there pretty definitively.
Okay. I can tell you my thought on, it's, if we don't allow to the front of the structure, then even a small wildflower bed in your front yard would technically be,
But would that be a garden?
all right.
Because
Yeah, well, that's true.
That's what I thought about.
That throws us into an allowed,
cultivated area.
yeah.
Planted and maintained with well-defined borders. People.
Which is what his yard is. It's well-defined borders. It's mowed around, well-defined,
It's
and
cultivated.
it's a garden.
Well-defined borders. It's
It's a garden. It's just not the flowers that you would choose to plant in your garden.
Probably, yeah.
That's
They'll probably say some of that about one of my landscape beds too. So.
I say it about a lot of them when I drive by them. Why do they do this if they're not going to keep the weeds out of it?
Yeah, and again, Mayor, as Lori said, it's a matter of opinion, and that was just my opinion. Was to limit it to the front of the structure.
Gotcha. Okay. Lori, of the ordinances presented, then which would be the more palatable? Input it?
Yeah, the one that
The
was the second one
Okay.
that we've been presented with would be one that I'm in favor of.
that's the one that was
Rob?
emailed out today.
Yes. Or yesterday, I believe. I don't know. Was it?
916. So yep. So we're talking about the ordinance to amend city code reweeds and grass -916-20 document.
Yeah.
So is that I like that better than what I saw in the one 2 weeks
Okay.
ago. Mm-hmm. Like I said, I agree with Lori that this is going to come up one way or the other, and I like what I'm seeing here.
So I guess with that being said, then, oh yeah, I forget. Both of them said they weren't in favor of changing the ordinance. So
Well, I'm going to make a motion, Mayor, that we approve ordinance number 2499, amending section 8402 and 8407 of Articles 4 of Chapter 8 of the City Code to update the city's regulations governing maintenance of weeds and grasses.
all right, we have a motion on the floor. Is there anyone that would like to second that?
I'll go ahead and second it.
All right, do we want any discussion of the ordinance?
Yes.
No, we had last week we allowed, or the last meeting, sorry, multiple. So I think the meeting tonight was for us to then take it on and come up with what our solution is. So, unless you guys feel.
Lloyd's motion again, I didn't quite.
Sure.
It cut out.
I just approved the motion to approve ordinance 2499 as presented here on the second one that was presented today, or yesterday, I guess it was.
Thank you.
And that was
So
moved.
Mayor, as a discussion, we're not going to consider Kevin's setbacks then with amended to this?
It was not in the motion. So.
I did not put that in the motion.
But the other question is, hadn't planned to allow a lot of public comment since we had a lot of public comment at the last meeting. Unless if the council feels differently, I would certainly be open to allowing some folks to speak if there was anything new to be presented. I think we all got the 15 or 20 emails. We got everybody's comments. So.
Well, I think procedurally we got a motion on the floor, so I don't know that we would would
Yeah.
now open it up to public hearing, but
It's not a public hearing.
right,
It would be
public comment.
public comment. I mean,
I'm not adverse to it, but
The motion is on the floor, though.
yeah,
We
Mhm.
would have to ask you to withdraw the motion if you're going to open it for public comment.
okay. Well, that was my thought, and I don't mean to close anybody out, but we heard everybody. We read everybody's emails. We heard your comments at the last meeting, and that was my thought. So, with a motion and a second, if there's any other discussion, if not, we'll do a roll call.
Hannah Michael,
yes,
Lane,
No,
Murdoch,
Yes.
Ritter,
No.
Daniels.
Yes.
Okay, the motion has carried, Mayor.
Okay.
so can we have a little follow up though
Sure.
about Rob's question? In that now
Is it
how does this apply? Can you help?
so for the I think what you're asking is for the existing property that came into play.
Yeah, your
Do
question.
they now
yeah.
fall under the newly passed ordinance and they need to bring it in compliance with the new ordinance, or do they have to comply with the old one and we define whether it was a garden or not a garden? And
Certainly. You want to go to the microphone, Patrick? Sorry.
As I think was mentioned at the last meeting, our code enforcement officer, when presented with this and when presented with the documents from the state of Kansas, he believed that this was not an enforceable situation. So he did not take any enforcement action. The ordinance that you passed tonight will be effective upon publication on Tuesday. So right now there isn't any enforcement, and we really wouldn't be in a position to go back and cite them under the old ordinance. So yeah, I think there would be, I'll have discussion with Walter, and we'll have to assess what needs to be done to the property to bring it into compliance with this ordinance that you've just passed. We normally always discuss enforcement with the property owner. We rarely ever just ticket someone or issue them a violation. So that would be our normal process would be if there are, and it sounds like there are things that need to be done to bring it into compliance, those are things that Walter would talk to the property owner and get some commitment that those would be done, and if they don't follow through on that, then there would be enforcement action.
So it would be considered under essentially a current complaint,
Correct.
but with the new guidelines.
Correct.
So it would still be acted on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything?
No. I would imagine over the weekend the family will be pulling out a lot of ragweed out of their yard.
Okay, so, but my question was, the ordinance said that he has to get permission from the adjoining landowner.
No, that's not the ordinance that was passed.
We have no say in it.
Well, there was a lot of say in the last meetings. I mean, what were you do you?
I guess
It's not my place. It's the mayor's place to
Right.
say this, but there's not going to be new information that you had. There wasn't new information.
offer a compromise. Can they just keep it to the back of their house, not the south? Would we be compromised that way? So just a compromise.
Yeah. Sure.
What about other options? Well, there's plenty of other options that can be made. We had options when we improved our land 35 years ago, right by that same area. We got
Okay.
wildlife bungles for we got berry bushes, we got seed plants, no weeds, and it was all wildlife habitat.
Yeah, they don't do that anymore though. So, would you, for our records, would you mind going to the mic and stating your name and address since you've had comment? Thank you.
My name is Jim McNaughton and my wife Patricia. We actually bought our property 35 years ago, and we were made to conform to every single ordinance that the city had because this was a rundown farm, and it was full of weeds and full of brush, and we had to clear it. We were made to do it by the city. And so when we figured out what to do to improve our property, we asked K-State to help. And K-State came in with plenty of options for us to use for wildlife habitat with no weeds. And that involves plenty of cedar trees and wildlife habitat, Russian olive bushes, tons of things that we still have.
Yeah, I think most of like the Russian olives and the eastern cedars are considered invasive species now, and we're no longer.
Well, they
we were
still have
probably
others.
not doing the right thing back then, but we don't need to debate that now.
They have other things, though. I mean, it doesn't have to be weeds.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. McNaughton, for your comments and coming to the meeting tonight.
I'd like to make one comment, please. I kind of started all this, if you would, please.
Okay.
I'll keep it brief.
Sure.
So, I appreciate all the conversation. Evan Hake, thank you. I live at 9105 Oak Country Lane. I'd really like to issue my thanks and an apology to this room, including Mike and Nita and you all as well. You know, when I entered into this, it was something I was trying to do good, something for me and my daughter, and I think you know what the road to hell is paved with. And so, you know, I mean, you know, we've lost some friends in the neighborhood because of this. I mean, and all of that. And so, you know, I'm sad about that, but I'm appreciative of the fact that we did not let my mistake compound into another mistake, which would be to mow this habitat. And then the last thing I'd like to say is I'm really proud of my daughter. I think many of you have seen the work that she's done around this and the signs and the shirts and all of that. And so I appreciate the work that she's done. And she should be proud of herself. And I think she's done a fantastic job. So thank you. So that's all I have to say, and I appreciate the consideration of this issue. Appreciate that.
All right, moving on to new business. Item A, received presentation from the Park Board or Park Bond Referendum Survey. No, not the Park Board. Is Bill on the line?
No, I don't see Bill, but
All right.
Whitney Lang is online,
right.
and she has a presentation for you that I've got here.
All right.
Whitney, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
We can't see you though, Whitney.
We can't see you though.
Hi.
I know you have a new puppy. Let's see that puppy.
Now it says that I am not able to join by video.
Okay.
So, man, sorry about that.
We'll struggle through then. Yeah, so just by way of background, Council, you know, after the defeat of the referendum in March, we wanted to get some sort of an idea about what the voters felt about the improvements that were in the referendum to help the park board kind of focus their discussions, because now we have to consider those park amenity improvements in the context of overall master plans, capital improvement plans, and city budget. So the thing the park board's going to be focusing on this fall is some recommendations regarding park improvements so that the council can consider those when we update the CIP around the first of the year. So we sent out a survey, got a couple hundred responses. Whitney's got a great presentation that I'll allow her to step through here in just a minute. Presented this to the park board, some valuable insight. The other thing the park board was wanting some direction on, and it's probably it might be for another meeting, was the question about whether or not we think we want to head toward another revised, smaller referendum to put to the voters at any time in the immediate future or at some time in the far future. So maybe kind of contemplate that a little bit as we're hearing Whitney's presentation for some direction for them. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Whitney, and she's going to have to tell me when to advance through the slides. Whitney, it's all yours.
Yeah, it just got popped off, but I am back on. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yay. Okay. So you can go ahead next, Mike. So the purpose of the survey was to understand the 2020 bond election results, and then just to come up with a guide for the Park Advisory Board. As background, as you know, the bond did not pass. It was 52 to 48%, just 43 vote difference. As a background, about 50% of DeSoto residents are registered voters, and then 36% of registered voters actually voted in the election. Now, is that a lot? Is that a little? Well, I pulled the historical elections over the last few just to see how that compared to the rest of the voter turnout, including the primary that just happened. So in the chart on the right, the complete bar is the amount of registered voters. As you can see, it's increasing over each election. And then the light green shows, yes, the registered voter voted, or the dark green is no, they didn't. But as you can see, it's all across the board, just dependent on the topic. Basically, the 2016 presidential election was a little bit different than the USP 232 recall.
Uh-oh, Whitney, your audio's cutting out. Uh-oh.
Can you hear me?
Okay, yeah, we can even see you now.
Oh, okay. Did you catch all of that?
I think we were done hearing about the bar chart on the right.
Okay. Yeah, so basically, there's nothing that sticks out here. You're pretty even with the primary that just happened. And then you can go to the next slide. Okay, so the survey was organized into 3 sections. There was the voting, so were you a registered voter? Did you actually vote? Then what did you like about the bond package? What did you not like? And then it goes into demographics. So depending on your age or if you have a family, how do your answers differ than everyone else's? We wanted to see if there was any insights to that, more for communication pieces. Next slide. So background on the survey, it was an online survey offered in both English and Spanish. Pushed the link to media, website, couple newsletters,
Yeah, I'm sorry, Whitney. We're still having trouble. Your kid's kind of coming in and out.
It's talking on me. So are you mic cutting out for you?
I can hear you now. You're good now.
Oh goodness.
Let's try it one more time.
Okay.
Kill your video, maybe.
Yeah, maybe if you kill your video, it'll help. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, let's try this.
Try that.
Well, you can see all the information. Basically, I just said just a little bit of survey background.
Okay.
Next, Mike. And then, Mike, if you can't hear me, or if I'm cutting out, just start waving at me, because when I hear you in return, it just is static.
Okay.
So who actually filled out the survey? We had 233 respondents, and 94% of those were registered voters. Of all respondents, 76% of them voted. And then to narrow that down a little bit, the people that were registered to vote, 81% of them actually voted. And then 41% of the respondents had children under the age of 18. And then at the bottom right, I've added the age chart of the respondents, which kind of focuses on people 35 to 64 years old. Next slide. So what did people like and not like? Now, if you were in favor of passing the proposed bond, what was your reasoning? And people could check all that they wanted. Of course, the number one tied for first was park upgrades and trails. And what I found most interesting about this chart is that more people thought that the bond had a reasonable tax increase on them than they were actually in favor of the youth sports fields. I think that's pretty interesting. Next slide. Okay, if you weren't in favor of passing the bond, what was your reasoning? And it's important to note that the question doesn't ask, did you vote for the bond or did you not vote for it? We did want to know what people thought of the bond package, even if you can't vote or you didn't vote. And then people could answer both questions. So it's not one or the other. Some people might have really liked the bond, but just didn't like a piece of it, so they wanted to share that. Didn't happen too often, but that's where there is some crossover. Of course, the number one reason people didn't favor the bond was that the bond amount was too high. But the next piece that people did not like was the youth sports fields, whether they did not feel that DeSoto needed them. And what I found interesting about both of these questions is that there's kind of a uniting characteristic or quality between both of those groups of people for and against, and they kind of focus on the youth sports fields and whether they like or dislike it in the bond package. Next slide. So whether you like the bond package or did not, we did want to know how much tax impact are you willing to accept specifically for parks and recreation amenities? And 32% of people said absolutely nothing. Per month, I don't want any difference in my taxes. I will not vote on that. But that means 68% of people would at least accept some level of increase in their taxes. Now, compared to the 52% of people that voted against the bond, there's a little bit of discrepancy. So I think there might be a disconnect between what people actually thought, what people thought the tax impact would be on them, and then what it actually was. And so my example is 45% of people said that they would accept a $1 to $10 tax increase. But if you have a $10 tax increase per month, your home would have to be valued at over $400,000. And I think that's a little bit of a steep number. And so I just wonder if other people, the voters, realize that. Now, so comparing a survey respondent to the actual voter is a little bit hard. Obviously, people that took the survey might have favored the bond more than people that obviously voted for it or against it. So I wanted to know, the people that said that the bond amount was too high, the reason they did not favor this bond was that the bond amount was too high, what would they accept as a level of increase per month? And so those 82 people, I filtered out their responses, and you'd think that maybe if the bond amount was too high, maybe 100% of people, they would not accept any increase per month. But actually only 66% of people did. That means that there's another 34% of people that would have accepted maybe $1 to $5 at least of an increase. So once again, it comes down to, is it people might have assumed that the taxes would impact them more than they actually would, or are people willing to spend money on parks and recreation improvements and amenities, but maybe just not this specific package and how it was laid out? Next slide, please. This question asks, which of the following trails would you use if they were available? They can select all that apply to them. At least 70% of respondents said they would use at least one of the proposed trails, which is good. Kill Creek Road being the number one trail that people said they would use. Interesting thing that I saw in this data was that K10 was the lowest bond priority out of all the trails, but in this survey, the second most likely to be used. Next slide. Okay, so we want to know whether you liked the bond or didn't like the bond. How do you rank the projects in your own importance, like your opinion? And I want to point out that park upgrades is actually split into Miller Park improvements and Riverfest Park improvements. Now, as you can see the chart, by far, almost, trails was listed as number one the most amount of times, with almost 50% of people think trails was their number one most important. However, if you look at the actual overall score of each of those projects, which you can see in the bottom right, Miller Park came out a little bit ahead of trails. And I wanted to know, what could be causing that? What is responsible for that? And that is answered in the next slide, or at least a little bit hint to it. Okay, so once again, I took those people that thought the bond amount was too high, and I wanted to know, what did they actually like about this bond? Not that there's only six people that answered this, but I did think it was interesting that even though they did not favor the bond, they still favor the park upgrades. Like I said, there's only 6 people who said that, but I thought that was interesting. What trails would you use? Just like everyone else, they said Kill Creek Road the most. And then this is where it gets back to the last slide and why this one's a little bit more interesting, is how would you rank the projects by importance? The people that said the bond amount was too high by far favored Miller Park improvements above everything else. And then I wanted to compare it against another group. So I chose the people in question 2 that compared it against, that said there was a reasonable tax increase. And those people by far said that trails were their #1 priority. So I just thought the difference was interesting, that the people who focus on money in both ways have different priorities, and they level out to say Miller Park overall has more importance. That's just because of the stark differences in people who are for or against the bond. Okay. Question 8 did ask for additional comments from people. I didn't do an analysis on this, but I did organize by positive comments, negative comments, and then ones that had feedback for the group to read. And that starts, I think, on page 38. There's a couple pages of comments, but here are a couple. And then for demographics. Okay, so when I say, so in the next slides, I'll say something like it's significant or significantly more likely. And that just means that with this data, I can confidently say that the statements I'm making are backed up. That they are real. They're not just, they look like something is happening. No, these groups that are segmented are actually voting and responding in different ways than other groups. So, like I said earlier, 41% of the respondents had children under the age of 18, and they were significantly less likely to vote in the bond election, which is interesting for Parks and Rec bond referendum. And then this is pretty obvious, but just to help with my next slide, is they are significantly more likely to be in the 25 to 34 and 35 to 44-year-old age ranges. Okay, so 2 pieces of insight that I gathered from age ranges. And this is more, if you read the Part 4 presentation, this is more for communication. If nothing else about the bond change, these are just interesting things to use for communication in the future. But I think they're interesting, so I'll share them. Okay, so that age range I just talked about, 35 to 44, they were one of the most represented age groups. 95% of them were registered to vote, and yet they are significantly less likely to vote in the election than ages 55 to 64. And it's by a lot, the 90% versus 71%. Also interesting, ages 55 to 64, 100% of them were registered to vote. And then to further that, ages 35 to 44 were significantly more likely to be in favor of the youth sports fields than ages 55 to 64. So the people that were in favor of the youth sports fields are the ones that are not voting. And then the other interesting piece was about 45 to 54-year-olds. They were significantly more likely to not use any of the proposed trails. However, they were significantly more likely to put trails as their most important piece of the bond. So just a little interesting tidbit. And then, but my most important takeaways are these, both people, whether they're in favor or not in favor of the bond, they seem to appear to like Miller Park upgrades. People that are in favor and not in favor of the bond appear to have some issue with the sports fields being a part of the bond. And then 68% of respondents said they were okay with an increase in taxes for Parks and Rec amenities and improvements. That just doesn't line up with 48% of voters who voted yes for that in the election. So once again, there's room for opportunity here. That was just an extra slide just in case I got asked about it.
All right, so that's
That was a
that's
lot of
just,
information.
yeah. Thanks, Whitney. I'll close the slide presentation then.
Okay.
So I guess, like I mentioned before, you know, the main reason for that tonight was, you know, just to fill you in on the results of the survey, but also get some feedback, a little bit of feedback, if you care to give it, on for the park board, specifically on which projects that that you think should remain at the top or come to the top, or to kind of help direct their discussion. And like I said, they'll be talking about that October, November, and December, probably at their meetings, to come with some recommendation for you before the first of the year on integrating parks improvements into the CIP or other city funding mechanisms. And then, you know, I don't really have anything to present you on the follow-up question that the park board had. I know, Mayor Walker,
Just a question.
you were on, yeah, just a question. You were on you attend those meetings, and so, you know, yeah, the park board, and staff as well. Really, we kind of need to know what your temperature is regarding a future modified referendum or not. I mean, we don't have to do anything. We can just let it lie, and go on down the road. Or, I mean, I don't, you know, the last thing I'd want to do from a policy perspective is dig into these numbers and try and figure out what's going to make them vote yes. I mean, that's not really kind of what we're after. But if there's a feeling that the council feels like, you know, that the vote was during the pandemic and people were scared and there was reasons that, you know, we might want to consider, then, you know, let's forward that discussion as well.
Comments from the council regarding that question?
I was going to say two things, actually three. I would be curious to hear the park board's recommendation and what they're thinking. Survey opened when and closed when?
Whitney, do you have that off the top of your
About
head?
6 weeks, wasn't it? Is it closed?
Yeah, it's July 7th to it's the first fourth
Labor
day.
Day.
July 7th to September 2nd.
Okay. I have a feeling that COVID may have helped add some importance to the trail situation. I know personally, many of you have heard my fitness and health journey of where I started, which means started taking walks, and we'll occasionally do what we call the big loop, which is A7th to Corliss to 91st Street over to Kill Creek, and then walk Kill Creek back to 89th. So we end up walking Kill Creek from 91st up to, or 95th, not 91st, 95th, up to 89th. And the widened lanes are definitely nice. But the trails would be nice. And as people haven't had gyms and things like that, that has probably raised their awareness. At the same time, I don't see, especially having watched the county increasing property taxes, I don't think I see wanting to go back with a tax increase or referendum at least this year, and maybe even partway into next year. With the job situation, the uncertainty, and the tax increase that they're going to see, because basically of the taxing jurisdictions that our DeSoto residents are under, being the fire district, the DeSoto, the county, and what's the one I'm missing? School district. 3 out of 4 of them lowered the tax rates a little bit, but I don't think our residents are going to see much of that based upon the county's increase. So that's my thoughts.
Okay.
But if we do something, it would be towards trails from what I've seen.
I'm not really in big favor of doing another referendum right now. Maybe in 2022 or something. Let's see. Yeah, I think we just need to give it a break. For one, it costs money to do that, and I don't want to do it to spend money again to get a no again. But even though trails were important here to the citizens, I still can't help but go back to the sports fields for kids. It would be nice to know how many of these respondents had kids that were playing soccer, and the things that we've been fighting for so long for in working on these fields for these kids. The trails are nice, and believe me, I use trails just as much, if not more, than Rob does, and I'm all for trails. But there are also a lot of trails that a person can get to. And the nice thing about the sports fields is, as that program can grow, so can our. As the field, we get better fields, we can grow our program, and we've got income coming on that. That helps to do things, and so I get that the numbers were lower, but I still feel that soccer fields have got to be somewhere in what we're thinking about
Not
doing.
to interrupt you, if you read through the comments, I think there was a misconception or bad perception about what kind of soccer complex was being proposed. When you read the comments, it seemed like people thought maybe we were proposing something similar to the Garmin complex at Ridgeview and Olathe, and we just want flat fields for kids to play on.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's probably really true when we're looking at this big $3-some million project. If people aren't really familiar with how much it really costs to just put a soccer field in, they're going to think, hey, we're doing this, we're way out of our league for DeSoto. The trails, all these. So I think, we know how much it costs to do such a thing because we've researched it, we see it. Some of you guys do this every day, but you take some little old lady that's thinking $3 million. Wow, those kids don't need that to play on. So I think that misconceptions possibly, yes, Rick, are there as to what it was going to be and what we're getting out of it. So I definitely would like us to still go down the path of looking into decent soccer fields for our kids, and finding a way to keep, that's been something that I've been trying to fight for. I think we are way delayed because of efforts we tried to share with the county, and that didn't do so well. And I think we would have been a long way ahead of where we're at now had that whole thing been a little bit different story. So still, sports fields, meaning soccer fields, is still high on my agenda.
Can I make a quick clarification?
Sure.
I agree with you. The only thing I was thinking is because of the delay and when we would even think about doing another referendum, we've already purchased the property or looking at purchasing the property. So part of my view on the soccer fields is if it wasn't favorable in the bond, then let's find a way to get that moving before we put up another bond in 2-3 years and push it out even further.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
I might take, I agree with Lori also on the importance of that, but I found the survey fascinating and really wondered if we should have done something like that prior to get one more read on the pulse of what people wanted, because I feel like looking back, maybe we did try to bite off too much, and had we gone out with what the people are saying, something a little smaller, maybe $1.5 million, maybe something that has a tax increase that's a single digit. And we've known from public input that trails are important, and it showed up again. And it's also interesting that Miller Park, the park in town, was what got people's attention. When I read the survey, my gut reaction is, let's not right away, but I could support going out next year with something that's more modest and that's trails focused. I think this should, and maybe Rob, you're right. Maybe it's that people are out more, but it swapped the focus on the trail along K10, and maybe there's something to be said about not trying to get a yes vote, but being responsive to what people are saying. Yeah, I would do that. I could support that, and that would be a more modest parks bond that I would say focuses on trails because it's getting the higher attention, but if we could have a bond issue, then maybe that saves some capital expenditure such that we could find some ways to do some other kinds of things that don't have to be covered under a bond referendum necessarily, but could be worked into our budget otherwise. Parks improvement. So if we could fund some of the, fund the trails through a referendum that we could get approved, then we can maybe open up some other opportunities. So I would support going out maybe late in 2021.
When we talk about trails, has there been much conversation with the county about trails? Because connecting to their trails and using their trails to connect to their park, and I'm just wondering if some of our trail stuff could be done by trying to get the county to do some of this.
Some county.
We're all county residents, and our money should go in our city too for the county. And you'd connect 95th Street Trail, the trail that's already here, and connect it to Lexington Lake in a way that's a good connection. I mean, that's taking care of one of, it just seems like that has that been looked at, I guess.
Yeah, well, the trails we have done have been county trails. I mean, we have.
Right, the ones we have are county.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. Why not get them to try to work with us in expanding more?
Yeah, I
in
can't say
particular
we've-
towards the trail.
In particular, coming off the Kill Creek Trail, going to Kill Creek Road, right, the one along K10, because that would tie directly to theirs.
Yeah.
In part, we get the trail situation going to the lake Concord with our road project. We put trails on it.
Yeah.
So we do
Yeah.
some, but yeah, if we could get some county funding to help with that, that'd be even better.
What are you doing, Kevin?
Yes.
Okay. Danny, any thoughts on a bond?
I think it's too early to talk about it, but next year, and this sounds good, and I think it would go over better. I think it would have to be late next year, not early, and go back to the park board, cut them things back, and refocus and have another couple of public meetings again. And then, if we do it right this time, I think instead of overloading everybody with the high price, I think we'll have a good response. That's all I have.
All right, thank you, Danny. Kevin Ritter.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm definitely for continuing to attempt. I was looking through some of the responses as we go along, and I think we should take some of the recommendations that they said, like first finding how we can get more registered voters, and then and get those that are in the age range that want parks and want stuff for the kids to do. I agree with you, Lori, 100% that the sports fields are very important for kids. If they don't have those things to do, they're going to be out doing something that they shouldn't be doing. So I would be supportive in looking at it again next year, but I think we also should follow some of the basic recommendations that they said about adding voters and things like that.
Okay. Thank you, Kevin. I guess what I would share is the park board was probably anxious to, the sense I got, they were more anxious to get a new plan together and get something out. When I spoke at that meeting, I prognosticated that it might not be until 2022, before we were ready to look at another bond issue. And that was a little deflating. It sounded like, I don't know if I really, since we weren't in the same room, it's hard to say, but just with the upcoming elections that we know we have, and then how it, and then fitting another bond thing in and getting figured out. But I agree that we need to look at, probably pare down what it is we're asking for and look at what would be supported and figure out how to pay for athletic fields, hopefully before the bond proceeds would even come into play. I don't know how that was going to happen, but we'll start doing some digging.
Okay. Well, I think that's great feedback. Yeah, we'll share that with the park board and continue their work toward those goals. And yeah, I mean, as their discussions evolve, we might need to get the two groups together, at some point this fall, before the first of the year,
Okay.
to kind of get all the heads together. So we'll look at doing that too.
We will next receive a park board recommendation on pool fee schedule for 2021 season.
Yes, Council. One of the things Park Board talked about at a couple of meetings was the pool fee schedule. This was really prompted by staff for two reasons, really. We haven't really looked at our fees in 10 years. They haven't been changed in 10 years. And when you compare what we charge to what surrounding communities charge, it's pretty obviously we're pretty far below the average there. I don't know if we're dead at the bottom, but we're pretty cheap. So that's one reason. Not necessarily that we rely. We're not trying to keep the lights on with pool fees, but it does make sense to try and be commensurate with other recreation programs in the area. The other thing we wanted to look at was really what has become the abuse of the family pass. And Jay can go into a little more detail. I'll ask him to maybe kind of get up and talk about this a little bit. But we've had increasingly over the years people claim to be a family with a family pass, and there's 6 to 8 to 10 people and 4 adults with different last names and kids don't live in the same house. We don't really have a great way, other than just we know these kids and we know these people, and so we don't have a good way to really police that. Other more sophisticated accounting systems might be able to track their address with a GPS point and do some of these more sophisticated things from a GIS standpoint that are just kind of really above where we kind of think we want to be with it. So the first proposal of the park board was, let's restructure the fees and get away with the family pass. Everybody's just got an individual pass, and that's just how it is. The park board felt pretty strongly that they did still want to encourage and promote the family discount pass as a family-oriented activity, and they didn't want to just do away with that. So after a couple of iterations, they do have a proposed fee schedule. So at the bottom of the staff report on page 2, there's the existing fee schedule, family, individual, broken out by adult, child, and a senior for resident, non-resident. And then the daily gate fees, anybody who just walks up. Of course, this is all during a normal year, which we didn't have this year. The proposed fee has a household pass, which kind of takes place to the family pass. We're limited to 4 people with 2 adults, and then you can add on children. Can they add on an adult? No, can't add on an adult. Only 2 adults, and you can add on children for $25. And then we have individual youth, individual adult, and then still the senior. And you can see the rates have gone up a little bit, but we're not a doubling. This is a relatively modest increase. So this is a recommendation that the park board has for you. We typically, all these fees are in our fee resolution that we look at usually at the first part of each year. We think we have a need to enact this before the year turns over, because Jay gets quite a few people who buy season pass for the pool in January. So we want to kind of capture those. So if you're in agreement with the park board recommendation, just make a motion directing staff to bring back a fee resolution.
Any questions from council?
Well, when you're saying that the prices are going up, it doesn't seem to me that they're going up. I mean, your adult is going from 60 to 30. That, right? So that's going down. Your senior is going down. Your child is going down. So we're really reducing the rates on any individual.
It's targeting the families is what it's doing, because for my family it would be an increase of $40 a year is what my family would see an increase in.
So basically, family right now is 6.
Or wait,
105.
yeah.
Family of 6 would now be 150.
And our majority of the passes, family passes that we sell. Okay.
Now, one thing this does looked at the fees for this year, it was brought up about trying to get something that's more affordable for kids, in terms of being able to come, if it's not a family pass, you know, say for my son or daughter, whoever to come, maybe low income. What this does for them is that reduces it down to $25. So it's actually an advantage on the single side for kids versus being at 55 currently.
So I think it's fine. I would maybe clarify that when you put that add-on, just put like child add-on youth or something, so that it's clear that that isn't an adult add-on. But an adult add-on would basically be
$30.
$30.
Yes.
I mean, you could add an adult on. It's just an individual and a family, kind of on the same name, really.
And I mean, I know for my family, the simple answer to solve the increase is kick some kids out. So, and we're working on it. So,
And that's another good point.
I mean, is
What we've seen in the past is, you know, a family's gonna put, when it's 6, we're gonna put everybody on there. Dad may not go, somebody else may not go. So I don't think in the long run, it may not cost a lot of families anymore.
yeah. And I mean, I joke about that. I have a 19-year-old who's moved out and pays his own bills and isn't here. He's not using it.
Right.
I have an 18-year-old that is going to boot camp in 2 weeks, and then he will be here over the summer, so he might use it. But our numbers are decreasing as our kids get older.
so 4 could be three children and 1 adult, or it could be 4 children if they're old enough to go by themselves.
Okay.
I don't have any more questions.
right.
Thank you, Mayor.
Anyone else?
No, sir.
Or motion?
I'll make a motion. We approve the recommendations and direct staff to prepare an amendment to the fee resolution for consideration at October 1st meeting.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Ritter. Ritter.
Do you know it's not?
Kevin, you're muted now.
How about now?
There we go.
Actually, Mayor, you asked for comments real quick.
Three
Can I ask
times
one
makes
question
it
before
special.
we do the roll call.
Yes.
Oh, you
You,
started.
you made it really quick.
Lane.
But
Yes.
after the vote, we make one.
Daniels.
Yes.
Michael.
Yes.
Murdoch.
Yes.
Thank you, council. Motion carried, Mayor.
So, question, Jay. Is it possible under the new fee structure that we'd actually decrease revenues with families, even like mine, that the kids are going away, to where we end up having people pay for just what they're using and therefore actually decrease the revenues?
There is a small possibility of that. I think we're gonna see, honestly, I think we're gonna see more of there are people that don't come, don't buy the single passes now currently because of the rate.
So you think the singles will make up for the difference? Okay.
It's cheaper, but I think that's gonna outweigh.
Okay.
My perspective is that's gonna outweigh.
Okay.
The reduction.
Okay. Yeah, that was my only question.
Okay. Item C, consider subrecipient agreement with Johnson County relating CARES Act.
Yes, Council, I've tried to keep you up to date on the county's progress regarding plans to distribute the $116 million they received from the federal government in May as part of the CARES Act COVID relief bill. Not to belabor the process, but essentially they've broken that down into 3 phases. The first phase would be to reimburse cities, municipalities, including the county government, for COVID-related expenses in concert and in accordance with the guidance from the CARES Act itself. They've allocated 40 to 50% of the funding toward that effort. Second phase would be the community outreach in the form of rent assistance, utility assistance, community projects, small business loans, that sort of thing. I think Kevin is part of Councilman Hademichael is part of that steering committees called the Strike Force to try and figure out how best to manage those funds. And then the third part would be kind of an administrative or contingency piece that we haven't heard much about yet. Over the last couple of months, the group working on the first part, the distribution to cities, has come up with recommendations and a process to apply for funding and get reimbursements. They also have a process to apply for future expenses to see if those expenses would be covered by the CARES Act and give pre-approval before the city makes those. So we'll talk about that in just a little bit. The subrecipient agreement is needed because these are federal funds that are being funneled through the county to municipal governments. And so this is just like every year we have a CDBG project that requires a subrecipient agreement. It essentially puts us responsible for the audit and to make sure that the funds are expended appropriately. So when you take the total amount that the county has allocated toward municipalities, they've divided that on a population basis and divvied it up for each city. And when you do that math, DeSoto has been awarded just over $200,000. So the exact amount is $200,638.05. So the subrecipient agreement essentially just says, DeSoto, you've been allocated this amount. If you can use that for COVID-related expenses, and we will reimburse you for those. They're not going to just give us those dollars. Those dollars will remain with the county, and it'll still be a reimbursement program. And whatever's left at the end of the year, you have to give back to us. So that's what the subrecipient agreement is designed to do, is to make sure that we know that we're still responsible for the accounting to make sure that the expenditures are in conformance with the CARES Act, and that if we don't spend it by the end of the year, they go back to the county. So in connection with that, like I said, they've got this process for pre-approval. We actually have already received $3,800 just in reimbursement for expenses that we've already made. I have already submitted for approval these items on this, the first page of the staff report on this table here. Tablets for video conferencing purposes, touchless drinking fountains, and a laminator for public signage. All these have essentially received pre-approval from the county, so these are all good to go. And the next item is on the agenda here is for the tablets. But whatever of these items that come back over my expending authority of $5,000, I'm going to have to bring back to you for approval of expenses. So we're also planning on, because we have $200,000, planning on future applications for the funding. Initially, every city in the county made kind of an initial request, and the county provided the information on all those initial requests and their analysis on whether or not they thought it met the intent of the CARES Act and should be reimbursable. Almost every city in the county did that. The county vetted those applications through their consultant and offered feedback to the cities as to which they thought which is eligible and a high, medium, or low risk of audit. So the ones that came back as eligible with a low risk of audit have been approved. And so what I did is I looked at those lists and I asked our department heads, hey, look at these type of improvements and what is it that we could reasonably apply for. And we came up with this list here on the second page, and we might add to this list as well. The biggest ticket item is HVAC replacements for City Hall. We moved in here 20 years ago, and I think we've replaced maybe a couple of these units, but there's 12 of them in total, and they're all 20 years old. They're going to need to be replaced, probably within the next 10 years. And if we put additional filtration and disinfection units on those HVAC, then they're eligible for CARES Act funding. So we're going to submit that. A number of other cities, probably 5 or 6 other cities, have submitted for HVAC systems in their buildings and receive the low rating for audit. Yeah. So it looks like those are eligible. A few other ones in there: a new floor scrubber for the shop, new office furniture up front here in the utilities area, with the rearrangement of the for the security improvements of the utility counter is going to be on the left, on the east side of that. So we're going to have to swing those desks around, and the current furniture doesn't work. So there's some in that. Obviously for physical separation too between Nancy and Erica. Large format printer for public signage. Rob, you had a suggestion.
Re-engage the AV company in here to where he doesn't have to have a second camera.
Yeah,
the way we're doing, and just integrate that.
Yeah,
right. Yeah,
that would be
exactly
COVID related.
Yeah, certainly.
And at the time we put this in, it went thinking that, but go ahead and actually have them. The integration.
There's some other odds and ends. So right now, what's on this spreadsheet here, combined with what we've already received and already been approved for, is pretty close to our $200,000 limit. But we've already gotten some bids on the HVAC stuff, and that number is probably pretty high. So I think there would be some room to do a few more things. So what I intend to do, if your council's okay generally with this list that I've got for future applications, I intend to make those tomorrow. Hopefully from the county, hear back within 10 days is their turnaround time on that, and submit to you the bids for whatever I need to, certainly the HVAC stuff, at the meeting on October 1st, because we have to get this money spent by the end of the year. That's the challenge. And it can't just be under contract or allocated. The project's got to be substantially complete. So Steve's working really hard on the HVAC stuff.
That's the only one that looks like it would be a challenge.
Yeah, right. Everything else
purchasing
is off-the-shelf stuff. Yeah, true. So that's the intent. But so for tonight, really all I need is just kind of general consensus about that. And then
do we need a separate motion on the 12th or whatever? Or the tablets are separate.
Well, the tablets are the next agenda item.
Oh, I see. Yeah. I'm not reading ahead. I'm just
really on this item, just authorization for me to sign the subrecipient agreement.
Questions for Mike? Pretty thorough.
No, but I'm glad we don't need a chimpanzee because it's prohibited to buy a chimpanzee from the wild in Section 18.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
The regulations are just ridiculous.
My goodness.
Exchange.
That was crazy.
I was going to say, I'd make the motion to move to authorize the city administrator to sign the subrecipient agreement with Johnson County for $200,638.05 in the CARES Act grant funding.
I'll second the motion.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Just a clarification, if I could, Mike, you made the comment that money would have to be returned, but actually we don't have any money and don't get any money. You just forfeit.
We forfeit.
Yeah. Okay. I just want to make clear that we have not taken that. Yeah. Okay. That's all.
Thank you. Anything else? Roll call, please.
Lane,
Yes.
Ritter,
Yes.
Honeymichael.
Yes.
Daniels,
Yes.
Murdoch.
Yes.
Thank you, council. Motion carried.
All right. Now we will talk about consider purchase of tablets for remote work and video conferencing.
Yeah, I don't want to belabor it, but these have been approved through that pre-approval process. The amount listed is $22,091.86. We priced out Apple iPads, and I guess the intent was we've got 14 of them listed, so it's all 5 council members plus the mayor, and all our department heads in the city would get one. I'd like some flexibility because I think I would prefer a Surface tablet over an iPad just because of what I do. And I think we could probably extend that to all the department heads. Would you rather have an iPad or a Surface? This would, or amount that essentially $1,400 per unit gets you the top of the line iPad Pro. And it gets you a pretty good Surface tablet. It's not the top of the line tablet, but it would get you a unit that's very capable. So, and I guess the suggested motion is just 14 tablets with accessories. So. I think that would still work, but just wanting to let you know, we might not buy 14 iPads. There might be a combination, and if any of the, if I think I would like the council to all have iPads, if that's okay. Just because when we have turnover, so we don't have, well, we got some of one and some of the other. If you're okay with that, but yeah, just the authorization for me to proceed with that expenditure.
Okay, any questions or thoughts on this?
Just kind of.
Mayor, go ahead. Go ahead, Lori.
Just why the council all getting iPads? Are they just going to be here at the spot? Are you wanting us to?
We would check them out. My plan is to check them out to you. Yeah, and you could use those just as you are now for viewing the electronic information, but also they all have cameras, and so in this meeting environment when we're online, it is very helpful that you happen to have all your own equipment and you bring it. But I think it's reasonable to expect, if you're going to be a council member, to have city equipment. If you're going to be expected to have that available to show your face to the online, to the online people, I think it's very helpful. So, I mean, that's why I advocate.
That's fine.
Yeah, I think it makes sense because we're all using our personal devices. I'm actually I use my work computer here, so I think that makes sense. I was wondering though, when you said for department heads, if the opportunity is there to acquire these, have you really thought about those job functions that may benefit from a mobile device with video conferencing technology that may not be a department head? So, do you have positions that are, like your building official, for example,
we
that,
have
that there may be other roles where this really could benefit that we can get funded?
So the 14 number doesn't include Doug Smith or Ron Creason. They said they won't use them, don't need them, won't take it if we got it. Does include Whitney. I think. Yeah. I don't know if she's a department head. Probably not. Department by herself.
I've seen Patrick and
Patrick is on there. Jay's on there. They're included.
Mm-hmm.
The water department does just bought a tablet within the last year to do some meter reading and stuff with. Same with the building inspection department. They just bought a tablet to use in the field. So
they're equipped.
They're less than a year old. They're already equipped to do what they need to do.
Lana,
do you want an iPad? Yeah, she's on the list.
Okay. I just want to make sure that you've thought through the positions and yeah. Okay.
Hey, Mike, if I could just add, I think maybe if the council agrees, before you hand them out, we've really gotten into emergency management and all kinds of other things. And I was wondering if we might be able to have contact, like maybe a folder or two in there for emergency management plans for our city and stuff. So if something does happen, we have it. We have contact numbers for everybody, and just have some vital information on them if we're going to have them.
Oh, yeah.
That would be handy to have, and you wouldn't have to go scrambling for it. Just my thoughts.
That's a good point. We haven't really talked with our IT people about setup of these things. I hadn't envisioned a need to have a lot of intensive setup with them, but that's good feedback. Yeah.
Okay, any others? Comments or questions or emotion?
Well, I guess one more question then, Mike. Or for you, Mayor, actually, should the motion be tied to that particular budget amount, or should we authorize a 23,000 or amount not to exceed 23,000 in anticipation of procuring 14 mobile devices? I mean, what kind of flexibility is needed?
I don't know what kind of.
It's anything over 5,000 requires your approval. I don't have an exact amount.
Is the CARES funding approval that exact amount,
That's what
or is
the
it?
question is, yeah.
Yeah,
Did you get that approved?
I got that approved.
Okay.
Yeah, but what I don't
probably
know
over that is coming out of our general.
might come out of our general fund, or it might be, hey, I went over on this, I went under on this. The county still
and the county
reimbursed.
washes
That's
it
my
out.
guess. So if you want to just say give some, just let's just say 25,000.
Well, if you've had that approved, I think we better tie it to that.
Yeah, well that's fine.
Okay.
Well, you don't have a dollar amount on that motion, so
Not on the motion.
Not on the
Yeah.
stated motion. Okay. Any other comments before I jump in?
Go ahead.
All right. I'll make a motion to authorize the city administrator purchase 14 tablets with accessories, with expenses to be reimbursed by the CARES Act grant funding.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion of the motion? If not, roll call, please.
Ritter,
Yes.
Murdoch,
yes.
Lane,
Yes,
Daniels,
Yes.
Hanamichael.
Yes.
Thank you, council. Motion carried.
All right.
Just a quick comment on Kevin Ritter's comment about having the emergency management. Even if it's not city property, we probably should have that distributed anyway.
It would be nice to have that as a folder.
Yeah,
somewhere
so-
rapid access.
I mean,
I just don't want you to have to
regardless
pull it
of
out
putting it
your
on the
back
new
pocket
devices,
after
just
tornado
making it
hits.
available. So
Yeah.
I've been there and done that.
Okay. Item 5, executive session.
I'd like to make a motion. We recess into executive session at 9:12. Gives us a little break there. For 15 minutes to discuss personnel pursuant to KSA 75-4319B1 with the open meeting resuming in the city council chamber at
27.
9:27. Thank you, Rick.
Sure. Do we have a second?
second.
Second.
All right. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. We will. How are we going to do this?
Yeah, so what we'll do is stop the recordings. There's nobody on the video conference that isn't a council member or regular feed. So I've locked that, and then we'll ask the remaining audience and Jay and Patrick to leave, to vacate
I'll be
the
back
room.
in 2. I gotta get some power.
Okay, we'll leave you on then.
Time you added.
But I'll go ahead and stop the recordings now.
I did it just for you, man. So everybody get out.
Okay, so we're still legitimately in session, but we're not here.
We're on a
Next
break.
couple
Well, we're on
We're on a break.
Yeah, I think, yeah, we might. Yeah, we're on a break right now.
All right. I guess.
How the heck?